I had lost my sister only months ago. When I called a friend, I was feeling completely alone and unhappy. He advised me to head down around the Umolgi. I think I said that correctly. Oklahoma? Perhaps that is a wetland or river, uncertain as me. And he wanted to hunt hogs. We had a hunt scheduled shortly, so I concluded he was correct that it may be beneficial for me. I headed out with my dog River, a Cocker Spaniel. About a mile through the forest, we had worked our way down to the well-known bass fishing lake when I smelled something that may have knocked a buzzard off a dung whack. I enjoy riding with you folks. Not even could I define it. Simply said, it was horrible. Thinking of what I smelled, I began searching for it. Something dead seemed to fit. Though I had my pump-action Mossberg loaded with buckshot and slugs, I felt coyotes would be a problem and wasn't really concerned. About that time, River vanished someplace and I began to observe water running through the woods. I thus understood I was approaching the lake. I observed something standing to the left of me as I circled a short bush and approached the pond. I knew I had to have smelled us. I knew what this object was, even though I could not see every little detail since I wasn't wearing my glasses. I noted his lips for some reason. He wasn't revealing his teeth either, albeit they weren't exactly perfect. It resembled more of a leisurely moment, like following toothbrushing. Still, what caught me off guard was seeing my shotgun. Originally hidden from the beast, it had been tucked beneath my leg, but in my shock, I stepped back to make it clearly visible. He looked at it one time and honed down on it with actual dread and awareness on his face. He knew what this was, and I think he realized it may damage him. I knew I had to act, as his gaze swung back and forth between me and the shotgun. I gestured peace with my free hand, sort of saying, "Hey, I am not here to cause you pain." That had to have pleased him since he turned and left. In fact, it resembled a glide more than a walk. Exhaled, I realized I had been holding my breath. I have to admit, I felt stunned to my very core. I know they are here right now. During the wet season, I returned out there with a friend and discovered 2 sets of tracks. I told Wes this one story once. Should you have any questions, kindly get in touch with me. I suppose he refers to Wes Gerber, the Sasquatch Chronicles author. Wales Gerber? Well, not sure exactly. I'm not certain about his reference. Nevertheless, I felt this was a fantastic narrative. He is not very arrogant, though. He is not projecting any assumptions. He recalls what he observed. He saw the monster, looked at his shotgun, and suddenly it seemed as though this thing knew what the shotgun was and it simply vanished. No aggression, no violence, no nothing. Rob, this man had an adventure of a lifetime, though. And what a great narrative Rob tells. I much appreciate you forwarding it, friend. Everybody found it enjoyable. Brian sent an email here. This is a fantastic one. Brian, I appreciate you forwarding this. He writes like this here. Running over your channel makes me happy. Hearing the stories you share is quite enjoyable. Their short length and simplicity appeal to me as not overly demanding. It makes them fascinating. I have a little narrative for you about a time I ran across a Bigfoot problem. In full-size 79 Ford Bronco, I was out in the wilderness with a young lady. Hey. Brian, I wonder whether you still have the Bronco. My Bronco came back at a 78, white in color. That was an OJ Bronco. I really like that automobile. Why I sold it eludes me. Still, I'm pleased we were in that car, else we might not have escaped. We were down in the woods doing what couples do in the woods at night when we heard a disturbance from something making sure we knew it was there. In the woods? Just what do you do? Where in the woods do couples go? Brian, I'm not certain what you imply here. Anyhow, I keep stopping this narrative. Apologies. There were never any hollers or hoops or tree knocks. It was just the god terribleness shattering of limbs and trees I have ever heard in my life. It was noisy and hostile. It wanted us to know more than simply that it was there. It sought for us to depart. One point, I went out and urinated, thereby designating its territory as mine. Thus, the Bigfoot researcher I spoke with indicated it was upset. Perhaps that is the case then. We never heard any grunts or tree knocks, the researcher further said. This Bigfoot was most likely a loner. He lacked buddies nearby to interact with. We stopped what we were doing and determined to get the heck out of there, whatever it was saying us. Fearful, my woman companion curled up in a ball in the front seat and gave her legs a head-down hug. Though terrified, I had to keep control and lead us out. Looking in the mirror, I could barely see any brake lights for anything approaching behind us. Expecting at any moment to see something leap out at us or show itself, we worked our way around a corner breathing. We then struck straight forward and I kicked it from third into fourth. But a tree laying across the road was ahead. It wasn't so large that we couldn't go over in my Bronco, but a smaller or less powerful car most likely wouldn't have made it. I made the split-second choice not to stop. I knew I could not be getting out of that vehicle and manually relocating the tree. We were traveling so quickly when we collided that I felt more like a paver in the road. We felt none. We were so terrified. We went directly to my friend's house located in that neighborhood. Over those roads, he and I had explored a lot on our four-wheelers. According to the Bigfoot researcher, since it followed us to his house that evening, the Bigfoot most likely knew my friend. Subsequently, he experienced other unusual events. He heard all kinds of noises outside one night, including growls and bumps like someone was hurling objects at the home. One thing I find confusing, it was really obvious it wanted us out of there. But why did it obstruct the path with the tree? Was it meant to hurt us, or was it meant to drive us farther into the forest? Alternatively, was it attempting to capture us on the tree? If so, what exactly it desired? This all transpired off of Highway 221 near Forest City, North Carolina. I would be rather interested to know if anyone has an answer for what they intended to do. I hope you can make sense of it. Thank you, Kim, for allowing me share my narrative. Oh, lad. Brian, I explained it exactly. That's a fantastic narrative, and those are fascinating as such a scenario exists. You mean you come across this monster or hear this in the forest? Do you suppose this actually drove the tree over? You are presuming, backing up, that this object drove the tree over. And I'm asking, did the tree just fall over, or do you truly believe this monster pushed it over? Was the tree a green one? Was the tree rotational? Was it just a coincidence? I mean, I'm not clear. All I'm doing is posing questions. If we were seated here together chatting, would you kindly ask? Though, I'm rather sure your girlfriend stopped wanting to go parking in the woods with you afterwards. She most likely never visited parking lot in the woods ever again in her life, but maybe you still know the girl. I'm not sure. Still, this is one of the few I have heard of where people are parked and making out and experiencing some magical events, and a Bigfoot interrupts the enchanted moment. It's a great narrative overall. And it's got, for the guy, it's got to truly annoy you. The girl most likely will get terrified to death. Again, though, I am simply randering and will be stopping. Brian's a fantastic narrative. I truly enjoyed it, and very much thank you. Thanks, friend. This individual prefers to keep his name quiet. He wishes to be anonymous, but here is what he writes. I enjoy these. This is a story from my neck of the woods. I left a note some time ago stating that I would tell you about an incident I had someplace around Memphis, Tennessee in 1997. I started thinking about how fascinating and uncertain my experience was, and I got reluctant to share it, even though you really must pardon me for not writing as quickly as I said I would. Still, everything I'm writing now truly happened. I tell you, if there is one at all, it is not much of an experience. Actually, I had no idea I was experiencing something at the time. Now, I wouldn't know if it were not for events later on that would come to define me. Eastern Arkansas, my little hamlet, at the last mountainous section of Crawley's Ridge, before it terminated in the Delta Plain on the western banks of the Mississippi River, is where I was born and raised. Lula was the nearest town in Mississippi to ours. I wanted you to know that, like you, I grew up in the Mississippi River Delta, and that I am also a boy of the South. Surely, sir, I grew up in such an environment. Man, we are river rats. I lived in Memphis, Tennessee, later in life following marriage. Oak Haven was the name given to my subdivision since it features several mature isolated forest stands scattered all around. After my encounter, I discovered that these stands of forest and underbrush stretched due south of my house to northwestern Mississippi, without a break save for a few well-traveled highways that would easily be crossed at night without anyone noticing. Using the tree line of the forests I described, one can reach South Haven, Mississippi. My house sat roughly 5 miles north of State Line Road, the border separating Tennessee from Mississippi. My house was lovely and backed onto a big green park. One little creek emptying into a 10-acre lake ran 100 yards due east from my house. Among the previously described mature forest stands, one ran beside the creek and intersected only one lonely residential road. Maybe due to a consistent thick grass always present and a fear of snakes, it bordered the area of the park people did not visit. The city maintained this area cut only every few weeks. For such niceties like picnics and such events, the grass would therefore often be excessively tall. I spent countless evenings cooking dinner for friends throughout the years. But one evening, I think it was 1997, I was home alone and standing out on my just-constructed freestanding deck. I was praising the choice of site and workmanship. Though it was snuggled within the pines and surrounded by several large maples placed on a half hill, it nevertheless had an amazing view of the river. Late summer, it was just after dark, and a big full moon loomed above the line of forests that grew along the creek. Standing very motionless to view the moon, I considered how magnificent this view was. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted motion. It appeared as someone strolling across the field. I observed that he was just casually strolling along my neighbor's chain link fence, and that he appeared like a quite tall basketball player with very wide shoulders. He bounced about in a side-to-side motion with a spring in his step. His seeming all-black outfit gave the sense of him being just a shadow in the moonlight. His tall, slender, strong appearance was tarnished only slightly by a little beer belly. His path followed my backyard fence, where I was hiding from view among the low-hanging maple leaves. He abruptly halted and stood motionless for 5 seconds or more before descending straight down into the dense grass, so sending someone observing him. This behavior alarmed me so badly that I turned and hurried back across my yard to reach my rear entrance. Once inside, I locked the doors, then peered warily through the windows. Though I could not see much outside right now, what I had observed for the rest of the evening bothered me. A few days later, with the episode totally off my mind, I had another one of my little gatherings. Usually just guys lounging about preparing steaks. My wife worked second shift. That evening was not unusual either. After our dinner, we were hanging around when we decided to head inside with our beers as the citronella candles weren't doing their duties. Something rocked the entire house with a loud slap while we were seated chatting. I had vaulted ceilings and assessed the impact to be minimum 12 feet up. Furious that someone or something had flown into my house, I walked outside to investigate. A few of the others trailed behind me, but there was no trace of anything that might have struck the home. Though that didn't really make sense, I reasoned perhaps a goose had flown into it. The rest of the evening, we passed ideas about what it might have been. Not one of them seemed to retain moisture. Many years would pass before I find out that a Bigfoot often engages in house slapping. That night, I saw a Bigfoot, and it offended him that I watched him while he was not conscious. I believe he hit my house in payback. The numerous cookouts I also think drew him there. Though it sounds like nothing, it happened. Although I would want not to have my name used, the description of my property will let the locals know who I am. Not long after this, I moved to Arizona, for different reasons, still oblivious of what I had seen and experienced. I didn't really know I had had an encounter until I started reading and listening to programs like yours. Appreciate you reading my story. Brandon sent this email here. This is a pretty excellent one. He says, "Let me start with a big thanks for what you're doing. You have a great old time while entertaining and informing and teaching folks. We will simply be skipping all that. Thank you. I value your stating of all that, Brendan. I would much rather do this than you would like hearing. I swear to you." Let us thus now begin his narrative. Among three, I was the youngest and roughly 15 years old. Though my elder siblings had moved out for different reasons, I felt I could never go. About 25 acres a mile outside of Hurricane, West Virginia, my father owns a little tract of land, surrounded by the land of my late grandfather. I have hunted in these forests and the nearby estates all my life. Mountains, cliffs, and caverns abound on this ground. So thick with bush in some areas, you cannot shoot a 100 yards even in the winter when the leaves are gone. That is, and still, my house. Though I no longer live with my father there, I still hunt and occasionally trap on the land. It is as much a part of me as my 2-year-old son. We returned to the house late one night after helping my father's new lover relocate. We stopped in our tracks as we got out of the car. Coming from a large hillside field, once a horse pasture on the other side of the house, we heard the most god-horrible yelping and snarling. I ran around the house and arrived before my dad. At the time, we owned 3 small dogs. One was a rat terrier, the other 2 were mixtures of chihuahuas. Blinded by the mix of home lights and darkness, I nearly stumbled over a coyote eating one of them. Their jaws locked, they were whirling in circles, roaring up a storm. I grabbed onto my dog's leg instinctively, dragging him away from the coyote, and threw him some feet behind me. Another coyote rushed across the brush to my right at that same instant and plowed into the first coyote. Both of them were quickly up on their feet and sprinting across the old logging road past a barn constructed by my great-grandfather. The total event couldn't have lasted more than 10 seconds from beginning to end. I knew the dog the coyotes had taken was Rocky, the smallest of the 3, once they disappeared. It passed swiftly under my dad, who appeared to have wandered the home rather than sprinted. Glancing back at the barn, I noticed something else. It was an other set of eyes. On the distant slope left of the barn, 8 feet up a tree. Just enough light from my grandmother's house lit one side of the tree. The eyes were large and separated greatly. There gleamed with a distinct hue from the light on the house's trees. The eyes were dark red, while the home light was more of a yellow one. First, I didn't believe it could be eyes, then it blinked. It pivoted its head toward the light as soon as it blinked. Still concealed in the tree's shadow, I never lost sight of those eyes. Do you observe that the head turned away and then turned back, never losing their brilliance? I queried my dad. He answered with, "Get inside now." I asked him once again, not sure he was seeing what I was seeing. "Did you see that, Dad?" Saying forcefully, "Get inside now." He was holding the door open. The rest of the evening I sat in my room with the lights on and the blinds closed. Though everything had just happened on the side of the house, my room's window pointed the other way. I so couldn't survey the field. Feeling like a sitting duck, my window was 7 feet above the earth. That object I observed would have to stoop to enter. Every minute of that evening burns into my consciousness. The toughest aspect might have been waiting for the dawn. Now 25 years old, I hunt diligently every year. I leave before dawn and remain out till my girl calls me home. I have also started to research Bigfoot rather actively. It's evolved into rather more of a religion than just a pastime. Along with my brother, I work on construction under my uncle. I never discuss it, since they are far from believing in anything of the kind. I believe that narrating the story will help me satisfy my need to share it. On a side note, my mother is a spiritual woman, a green witch devoid of a more fitting name. She boasts a varied spectrum of pals. She told me one day she was on her way to give a gift she had purchased for someone from an old acquaintance of hers. From back when they were teenagers, my mother remarked she had a story to share with us. Though I'm not very good sitting around listening to my mother's friends' stories, the woman arrived and this is the narrative she shared. She and a few other children went out to her family's farm way back in the woods when she was 17. In a little bowl-formed valley bordered on all sides by forest, they set a large campfire. When a bipedal monster covered in hair slid down the hillside and into the light of the fire, they were listening to music and throwing off firecrackers and generating all kinds of noise. She stated it had long, brownish hair and resembled an elderly man with a lengthy beard, but without a mustache. 6 feet tall, it moved with arms raised like a T-Rex. It seemed inquisitive, like a young toddler. I was absorbing every detail and riveted to every word of this woman's narrative. She added that other children began throwing firecrackers at it since they were terrified. Could you find that surprising? If only I could have been there that evening. Anything. I have had many strange encounters, and I discovered tracks by the creek not too far from my house. Tracks are actually all around here. I may relate my experience and hope you won't mind my cruddy typing skills. Everybody with a story should visit your page and share it. Cam, I really appreciate that. Hopefully your New Year is fantastic. Thank you, Brandon. I listen and subscribe avidly. Oh man! Brother, your storytelling and crediting skills can never match how crediting mine are. So, do not feel terrible one bit. This makes for an interesting narrative. You know, it's not a big, in-your-face kind of violent confrontation, but how would you like to walk out of your house and look next to the barn and see some eyes standing 8 feet above the ground, spread, real far separated? Red eyes shining like magic? Holy horrible. I just live in the country, thus, if I witnessed that, I would be a little startled. I leave, and I guess that it was day before yesterday. I strolled outside, early indeed. It comes around 4:30 in the morning. The night remained gloomy. I was out in the yard. Early in morning, I woke up. I always put a flashlight on while I drank my coffee. And I was smoking as well. I enjoy smoking 2 or 3 cigarettes first thing in morning. That is all I smoke from. I simply enjoy drinking coffee with smokes. And as I strolled across the backyard, I hit that light. And wow, there were 4 sets of eyes around it, possibly 30, 40 yards into the woods, that just sat there as soon as I touched that light. I recognized at last they were deer. Though they weren't moving, I knew they were deer. Usually, a deer will bob his head up and down, or turn his head. The eyes are not going to shine for a minute. Then they will return back, and you know what he is doing. He is looking at another direction, but a deer sorts things out really well. If still, they bob their head up and down. You see? I do this when I gaze upon the forest. I'll move my head slightly. I knew it was a deer, but it made me somewhat uneasy. And I didn't dash indoors. I merely stood there staring at him. I realized it was a deer when I then heard him strolling off. But given your desired view of 4 sets of red eyes, hello, guy. I guess I would simply lose it. I'm simply flitting about here, enjoying myself with these tales. Brandon's narrative is fantastic, friend. Very much thanks. This narrative is quite good. This is quite well written by a man I suppose reads a lot. People who read a lot will write really well, which lets you know. And he sent this in the mail. It took me most likely a month to get to the post office, and it was waiting there. And it's been on my desk for a few weeks. I would be quite happy to tell you this story. It's rather excellent. You should thus hopefully find it enjoyable. Jason is the man's name. He produces this. Kindly find attached the following account. It is accurate and has transformed me from a lazy skeptic into a somewhat vigilant fence sitter. Now, here we go. That is his writing style. Sure. Here we stand. Let me start my tale by saying, even though I grew up in a Raleigh, North Carolina suburb, at heart, I have always been a rural kid. When I wasn't there, I wanted to be on the farm owned by my paternal grandparents in central North Carolina. Rolling hills, water woes, Millowo fields split apart by hardwood trails abounding with quails, rabbits, and squirrels. On this property, wandering the forest, camping, shooting, and fishing, some of the happiest years of my life were spent. To a young lad yearning for adventure, it was bliss. For days, I would vanish into the forest. Back then, it was hardly a huge issue for a young lad to go off camping by himself, as long as his parents knew roughly where he would be and when he would be returning. Looking back, I was most likely safer in the woods on my grandfather's property than almost anywhere else. This area of the state does not have any harmful creatures, hence the only things that worried me were ticks, chiggers, and the odd copperhead. I would often go with my Boy Scout troop throughout the surrounding area when I wasn't playing Daniel Boone on the property. He wrote it out for me phonetically. You worry. See, I said it wrong. You Worry National Forest just nearby. If you are not familiar with it, most of this 51000 acre national forest is located in Montgomery County. Due to a directionally challenged assistant scoutmaster we christened Lost Again Lewis, I have traversed a significant portion of this woodland, sometimes cheerfully and sometimes begrudgingly. Oh, it is so humorous. His shortcuts may make a 5-mile daily walk into a 20-mile overnight trip. I stated all this just to say that I would often spend time in the woods, starting early in life. I know the area creatures, hence I don't frighten easily. Regretfully, while sharing a narrative like this, you find yourself compelled to qualify yourself to mute some of the inquiries from armchair cynics ahead of time. Though I'm not sure exactly why, I find that a lot of the Owari National Forest seems foreboding. The sunrises mostly diminish in the first hour of the day. Some areas seem abnormally dark and sinister, even on a sunny winter day when all the leaves have dropped. Local folklorist Fred Morgan's several books help to confirm this assessment and feature many stories of disturbing and frequently violent incidents that have happened in the neighborhood. I took a small break in early March of 2012 and decided to take my ancient Land Rover and travel for a lonely camping location in the Northwest Urus. I have always liked to fish, hunt, trek, and camp by myself. The solitude seems to me to be cathartic. To my great delight, the campground I selected was totally empty. An earlier travel trailer was housed at a host site, but its state suggested abandonment. As distant from the empty trailer as I could get, and as near to the deep woods as I could, I chose a spot at the very end of a loop road. I set up my big 6-person Cabela's dome tent instead of my smaller camping tent, since I intended to be there at least 4 or 5 days. I planned to turn in early after dinner. I was bushed. It was now dark. I turned out my lantern and curled into my sleeping bag and fell quite rapidly asleep. Though I know there are no wolves in central North Carolina, I woke around midnight from a distant cry that my sleep-altered mind says me is most likely a wolf. The howl set off a bunch of hounds bathing. Laying still for a few minutes to listen to all the racket, I soon found everything silent. Being a pragmatist and having heard many strange noises in the woods, I laughed to myself and attempted to fall back asleep. Closing my eyes, my sixth sense was tapping me on the shoulder and stating something wasn't really right. 10 to 15 minutes later, as I started to fall back to sleep, the howling persisted, and this time they were nearer. Once more, it sounded like a wolf's cry, but the tone was off. It was shallower and deeper. The dogs once more responded with a chorus of yelling, although they looked fairly far away. Although they were responding to an unidentified caller, they were not tracking it or it escaped them. I was somewhat perplexed at this point, but definitely not afraid. The fact that I couldn't name the animal causing the cries disturbed me. But I knew, quite truthfully, that this area of the state lacked any harmful species. I also carried a pistol, and what were the chances that this animal, whatever it was, would show up right at my camp? Not at all was the likelihood, right? Once more, I shucked and closed my eyes. This time, I sank into a very peaceful sleep. Just as loud, 45 minutes later, I jolt awake from a rumbling boom that felt almost on top of me, exceedingly loud, shaking the sleep from my mind. My first impression was that someone outside my tent was screaming at me with a bullhorn. I was afraid right away because it was so close, so unidentified, and so loud. More shockingly, as the scream faded, heavy breathing and bipedal footsteps in the leaf litter headed towards my tent replaced it. Although I attempted to persuade myself that this could be someone pulling a deadly practical joke, the steps were just too weighty. I recall thinking strangely that this prankster had to be walking about carrying anvils fastened to his shoes. And that ridiculous concept helped me to see right away that this was no hoax. Outside my tent, there was an extraordinarily big and enraged beast that I knew nothing about. Sitting up, but still halfway in my sleeping bag, I gently and silently scoothed to the middle of the big tent, shockingly thinking that perhaps being in the middle would offer some protection. Quietly reaching for my duffel bag, I gently flipped the safety and listened. My compact 9mm was there. You flush when you really get scared. Time seems to slow down and your senses seem to hone. Every leaf and twig that cracked under the foot of this beast was audible to me. I also clearly remember staring toward the approaching noise. And with every step, one could see little ripples across the black tent generated in a half-empty bottle of water. Quite like in the first Jurassic Park film, options kept running through my head. I made shout out, hoping that whatever this was would startle and run away. I could sit silent and observe what transpired, or I could get outside the tent and face it. Deciding not knowing what was outside, I chose to wait still. Though they slowed in speed, the footsteps were drawing closer. They halted around what I would estimate to be 10 feet from my tent. I was wondering whether to blast a few blind shots across the tent wall after pointing my weapon in this direction. Though I would usually never give gun safety any thought, extreme terror can lead to poor decisions. Looking back, I honestly would have emptied the clip had this creature moved another couple of steps towards me. Thankfully, I did not. The animal was now motionless, and I thought it smelled the air, since it started to snuffle strangely. It always followed a lengthy, hefty breath and reminded me of a pig sprinting, only deeper. A few feet outside, sniffing and growling, the animal was attempting to decide what to do next. And I was seated in the middle of the tent, scared, with a death grip on my small pistol and sweating. This continued for what seemed to be several minutes, although more likely it was about 30 to 40 seconds. I felt as though I would hyperventilate. I was so anxious that my arm clutching the pistol started to shake. I knew I really needed this to stop. I felt I was near both a bodily and a psychological breaking point. After a few more frantic seconds of contemplation, I understood that I had to strive to manage the circumstances, whether good or bad. I decided to split open the back tent, silently slide out of my sleeping bag, and leap out, ready to photograph. Trying to move my legs out of the sleeping bag, I made some noise, and the animal let out a grumble, nearly like a question. At the end of the sounds, there was an upward inflection that made me believe it might have been confused. Looking back, I think it might not have been clear that I was in the tent until I heard movement. I froze, and for a few more seconds there was a complete and terrible quiet. Then there came a deep, what I thought of as a contemptuous groan. Though it sounded like a bull snorting, it sounded almost cynical. Then it started to stomp off in the direction from which it came, growling loudly with each step. I heard a loud cracking sound, as if a big tree branch were breaking as this creature staggered off, then another thunderous roar. The sound of something dragging in the leaves and weighted footsteps kept moving away. I remained absolutely silent till I could not hear it anymore. Then I inhaled deeply to help my body release some tension. Though remaining on alert, I was starting to gently unwind. A few more minutes of silence later, I concluded the animal was most likely gone, but there was no way I would spend the remainder of the night in that thin nylon tent. I grabbed my car keys, carefully unzipped the tent, then snuck to my car. My hand still held my pistol. Driving to the closest town, I would locate a well-lit parking lot and sleep in my car. I would return to pick my equipment tomorrow. I thus started my rover and turned on the headlights. And to my horror, my egress was blocked by a big tree limb roughly 10 feet ahead of the truck. I was not so massive that I couldn't push it halfway out of the way and drive past, but it was big enough that I doubt I could drive over it without really damaging my car. But I resolved I wouldn't get out of my car until morning. I switched out the lights, dropped my seat all the way back, rolled my window down roughly half an inch to here, and shut off the ignition. To me, now, the rest of the night is a blur. I never returned to sleep, although occasionally I was not totally awake either. Though my thoughts would not let me, I would start to nod off. Fortunately, nothing else transpired. And first light, I broke camp and moved the tree branch enough to get my car out. My wife inquired right away, "Why are you back so fast?" when I got home. Though I wanted not to lie, I just couldn't find a way to explain what had happened without sounding like a crazy person. I thus created a narrative about not aware there was no mobile service. Then I felt awkward not being in touch with her for 4 or 5 days. Once more, I had no genuine interest in cryptids prior to this event. But I started reading everything I could on them right away, concentrating on Awori area reports. To my great surprise, I came across several stories from this region, including one quite well known. I discovered that I was rather near to the encounter described by Michael Green. I believe his name is Michael Green, who at the time worked with the BFRO in North Carolina and who had captured a thermal film of a humanoid figure stealing a candy bar from the top of a tree stump. Not long after, at a family get-together, my mother's grandmother, who grew up just outside the northwest edge of the forest, became agitated upon learning I had been camping alone. She stated it was extremely hazardous and I shouldn't visit there by myself. She wouldn't respond straightforwardly when I asked her why. Would only say just avoid visiting there by yourself. One should not visit there by themselves. Though I'm not sure whether I encountered the hairy linebacker, I know what animal walks on 2 feet and makes the ground vibrate, roars louder than a lion, and smashes tree branches. Tell me if you can come up with one, please. Though I didn't really see anything, the more pragmatic half of me thinks there has to be a logical answer. Should it be a Bigfoot? I'm glad I missed it. And I'm glad I'm not mentally seeing that nasty mug in close-up. The occurrence alarmed me enough that I avoided the woods for some time, but I couldn't stay far away for very long. I donated my tents. I finally acquired a tiny travel trailer after first acquiring some bigger weapons. I sleep like a baby while I'm out overnight right now. Though it works for me, maybe it's a false sense of security. I hope I didn't babble too much and keep up the fantastic effort. Oh, good manners, Jason. And, that is equally good as a visual cue. Actually, it's most likely scarier. Matter of fact, you cannot see what is out there, really. You can see water rippling in a water bottle. Its weight is so great that its footsteps shock the earth. Man, that would simply cause me great fear. I so well understand why he stayed away from the forest for some time, but I also know that living in a camper trailer provides security. I mean, it's a tent that can she can pick you up like a sack and carry you off. They were able to breach a travel trailer. And, it's just got to change your life. For a person who spent all his childhood in the woods and never experienced anything like this, and then goes through this one night as an adult